Caitlin, hi. How are you?
I am doing so well. Do you ever have that feeling when, like, you are about to introduce two people that you think will get along really well, and you're, like, kind of excited in anticipation, like, what's going to happen?
Yes, I've had that happen to me before.
Okay.
Yes, definitely.
And did they end up liking each other, or were they mortal enemies?
I'm going to say this has probably happened 3 or 4 times, and it's about a 50-50.
The reason why I mention this is because we are about to have Dr. Shepard, our murderer, reintroduce himself to Poirot, but now knowing Poirot's true identity as the world's greatest detective. So yeah, this is a bit of matchmaking, the kind of matchmaking where everyone is going to pretend to like each other for a really long time.
Yeah, a stunningly long time. But then there will be a definitive break.
Well, let's get into it. Chapter 7. Oh, and just in case people are like, what is happening? This is the Murder of Roger Ackroyd debrief. We're nearly halfway through, I'd say. And we're on chapter 7. I learn my neighbor's profession. Subtitle, oh no. Other subtitle, let's all suspect Ralph, I think.
Yes, wow. Well, very well done.
Thank you.
I'm going to read a very brief, almost pointlessly brief synopsis of this. But just so I learn my neighbor's profession, chapter 7, Flora Ackroyd visits Dr. Shepard and his sister in the morning. Flora wants Dr. Shepard to accompany her while she goes and visits the funny little man to enlist his help in finding her uncle's murderer, because the funny little man is not a hairdresser. He's the world's most famous detective, Hercule Poirot. And just so you know, Poirot takes the case.
What if he was like, no? And then the book just ends and we have like hundreds of blank pages.
Right. Or just like photos of him, of his hands on vegetable marrows and trying to garden and stuff.
It just devolves into like a photo essay of his time in King's Abbot, his scrapbook.
Yes, that's it. The Poirot scrapbook.
I like that alternate universe, that alternate reality. But we have a book. We know Poirot takes the bait. Shepard is having a drama hangover, I would say, where like the last night was so full of drama that he caused. He's avoiding Caroline, and he's just like kind of going about his day, even though his best friend has been killed and his other best friend is missing. You know, he gets home. Caroline is like, oh my gosh, Flora Ackroyd is here. And he says, I concealed my surprise as best I could. He's just like, oh God, okay. So like, here's one little cog. Little does he know, like the entire system is about to explode. So yeah, so she's basically like, hey, I really want to see your neighbor. And he's like, why do you want to go see my neighbor?
Your hair looks fine.
Yeah, it's really funny because Caroline is surprised too. She says to see that funny little man. And Flora's like, yeah, you know who he is. And they're like, oh yeah, we think he might be a hairdresser. And Flora's eyes open wide. So she's like, you guys are so dumb. Which is probably like so mortifying for both of them, right? All they want to do is both be right. They are both wrong. No snarky comments from either one of them, because when people love to be right, nothing will silence you more than being wrong, and there's nothing funny about it. And Flora says why he's Hercule Poirot. They say he's done the most wonderful things, just like detectives do in books. And then we also learn, and this is also kind of like double oh no, is that Poirot is in King's Abbot because of Ackroyd. They were good friends. Because we have the setup of the comedy of the he's not a hairdresser, he's a famous detective, that soothes us, I think, as readers into being like, how funny. Like, it kind of helps us pass over the fact that there could be anything else that was wrong.
There's just this weird feeling of like him setting his plan into even further into motion with this new information, but also being like, God, let's not go over there. How about we don't bother the greatest detective in the world.
Yeah. He's busy with his marrows.
Right.
And then also, Flora reveals for the first time that Shepard has lied to us. She's calling out Shepard. She's like, I think that you suspect him. And I think that you're protecting him. And why did you go to the Three Boars then? And we get this line where he says, I was momentarily silenced. I hoped that visit of mine would remain unnoticed. Flora then, though, kind of saves Shepard because she's like, you know Ralph better than anyone. You know that he's innocent. And Shepard...
Which is true.
Yeah, exactly. And Shepard is like, are you sure we want the truth?
He's basically saying neither of us want the truth, but for different reasons, which is horrifying.
Yeah. And then there's this really great creepy moment, too, where Caroline is like, well, of course Ralph didn't do it. He has such nice manners. But then, as an aside to his reader, Shepard says, I wanted to tell Caroline that large numbers of murderers have nice manners.
Shepard is so in the moment. He's reading the room. It's weird that he's so like, we're not going over there. And then once Poirot takes the case, he totally acquiesces to everything. That's
really interesting. I hadn't even picked up on just how inconsistent his motivations are throughout the whole thing. If you did step back and you just looked at this, before the ending is revealed, you'd just be like, what is this guy doing? And I think the motivations are so much dictated not by this person, but what we expect the formula of the story to be. That it's like, well, he's following the formula. We don't really have to ask about like why he's doing whatever he's doing. He's just following Poirot. He's following the mystery. We'd mistake him for the fly on the wall.
Right.
This whole chapter is just so full of dramatic irony. There are just so many moments. So Poirot's like, okay. Catch me up. Tell me the whole story. So Flora's like, Dr. Shepard knows more than I do. Which is just so rich and so wonderful. So then we get these really interesting moments where, again, it makes sense the way he's saying it if he's trying to do his best to help absolve his friend, but it makes way more sense if he's trying to cover his tracks. He says, I plunged into a careful narrative embodying all the facts I have previously set down. And I'm like, okay, asshole.
Right.
He's not saying I said everything that happened. He's not saying I said all the facts. He's saying I said everything that I've just told you. And it's infuriating. Also, the scene is so interesting too, because he is just given this center stage for a moment to like reveal himself to Poirot. He's making things up. He's weaving this web. It's one of those things where like the more someone talks, the more they expose themselves. And so it's interesting too that like we could read this scene as Shepard gaining a lot of false confidence because we know who Poirot is. And so, yeah, it's just one of those things where like, as soon as you start bouncing around between people's heads and thinking like, what do they know at this point? What do they know about the other person? I mean, Shepard says this story is a kaleidoscope, and I'd say 100% it is. There are just things reflecting and so many different shards and shapes. And this scene is definitely kind of feels that way. It has that intensity about it. So Poirot's like, sure, let's go. And very interestingly, he's like, Flora, you can go home, but Shepard, why don't you come with me? That gives us, we're like, oh, yay. Like you said before, it's like, oh, Poirot Hastings at it again. Poirot has a pal. But really, I think Poirot's like, I want to see what this guy does. We meet another little police team. It's another little police club. We have Inspector Davis, Colonel Melrose, who's the chief constable, and we have Inspector Raglan from Cranchester. Because it's kind of like the local cops versus the big city police officer.
I think that's what Raglan is, someone who I think just assumes an air of authority because of being from a larger, busier place.
Yeah, that's what I mean. He kind of like outranks them. Christie always puts this in. There's a bit of tension between the group of police. It's never like we are all aligned. We all agree with each other. And we see this right away. Like Melrose, the chief constable, and Raglan, they're annoyed that Poirot is there, but Davis is kind of enjoying it. And so it kind of becomes Poirot Davis against Melrose Raglan. And, they call him, they're like, we don't need any amateurs. You had your heyday. Yes, we acknowledge that you have this great resume and reputation, but isn't your time done? Aren't you a little old?
This is such an interesting thing because it's kind of been in every book. It's almost like this artificial attempt at lowering the bar, but we don't expect the bar to ever be lowered.
No.
So it's just weird to me that like in every book that's like the police are like, God damn it, this guy is such a, although Poirot really does a great job of smoothing things over this time.
Yeah.
Like he's very, you can tell he's been doing this for a while longer than since Lynx.
Exactly. You know, part of me is like, oh, is this just kind of the dance that Poirot has to do in every book that makes us be like, we're reading a Poirot book. If we didn't have it, it wouldn't be Poirot. Or, and I think maybe it does become a little like rote after a while. But in this book, I think it's interesting that he does this whole flattery dance with the police officers, because it's almost like he's showing Shepard. He's like, look at how I can manipulate people. And this is where we have the tension between those two knowledge systems, right? But we also have now, you know, like how in Lynx, we called it like a detective off, right? You know, it was these two detectives. And in this one, I'm calling it a deception off. Poirot versus Shepard. No one is telling the truth. No one is showing their complete hand. At any given moment, they're both concealing something. And we're just like, literally, this kind of like kicks off this big dance between the two. The game has started. Let's all lie to each other constantly.
Right.
And like, who's going to be the better liar? And of course, it's and deceiver. And it's Poirot. Okay, we're in case solving mode now. The fingerprints on the dagger don't match Parker or Shepard or Raymond. Shepard does not react, but we can imagine that he's breathing this huge sigh of relief. But that is such another like subtle little soothing way to just throw us off by ditching Parker, Shepard, and Raymond and like bucketing them all together. It's not like, Shepard, you are no longer a suspect. It's like, look at all these guys didn't do it. We learn that Ralph left the Three Boars at 9 and was last seen at 9:30. So that puts him in the window of when he still could have killed his stepfather. And again, we know that Shepard has engineered all of this. The police are about to go like test Ralph's boots against the footprints. And he's like, perfect. So then they go to like compare the footprints. And this is such a fun moment because Poirot is like, I don't really want to go do the footprints. I'm the least interested in the footprints, which is so funny because in both other books, he's like, the most interesting thing is the footprints in the flower beds. And so now he's like, yeah, I don't, So like there is this fun conversation between what's happened before and what's happening now.
That's great. Yeah.
This chapter, man, it's got so much. They return to the scene of the crime. Again, fascinating that the only person Poirot wants to bring is Shepard. And Poirot, he's so sneaky here. He's like, let's reenact the crime. Melrose, can you sit in the chair where Ackroyd was murdered? And Shepard, can you, because you're a doctor, can you show me what a stabbing would look like? Where would this killer have stood? So he's just like basically having Shepard recreate the crime, which psychologically, I'm just so curious what is happening in Shepard's mind.
Exactly. The feeling that I got reading it was that he's going to just do whatever Poirot wants and act as if Poirot is being upfront and honest with his kind of, you're a doctor, show me how this is done. But looking at it from what you just said, yeah, it's like Poirot could be playing him real early on. God, it's a real OJ situation.
Yeah, exactly. If I had done it. I just feel like this chapter is so rich in layers, and it's just fun to read and reread and just see all the different realities. Poirot goes through then this whole imaginary, he's like trying to work out what happened, and he's like, I think Ackroyd let someone in, and that's why we have the locked room mystery. And then that person left and came back. And so it's great because he's half right. Yes. Shepard did leave and come back. And so you just have to imagine he's sweating.
It's almost like he's got it backwards.
Yeah. And he's closer than everyone else. Then we get Melrose coming in and he's like, okay, like I have this new piece of information. The call to Dr. Shepard came in from the station. And a couple minutes later, a train to Liverpool left. And so they're like, Ralph if we're going with a Ralph thing, he called from the station and then escaped to Liverpool. And so Shepard, he's been thrown off, but he's like, they have taken the bait. This is exactly what I want them to think. So, again, he doesn't say anything. He just ends with Melrose's dialogue. We just get that and no processing. So usually he ends or begins a chapter by like doing something weird in a hallway. Like calming his nerve and avoiding someone. But yeah, so he just doesn't say anything, but you have to imagine that in that white space is this quiet little like victory dance in his head. So I love this one. And this reminds me, I had this old boss in one of my first big adult jobs, and he was kind of a kook. He would do this thing where he would say about certain people, not as a compliment, he would be like, that person is very confident. And the subtext is that the confidence is very unwarranted.
Is unearned.
Yeah. He'd say, oh, so-and-so, very confident. And you kind of just knew what that meant. And so chapter 8, Inspector Raglan is confident. It just took me back to that, where he feels confident, but whether that is backed up is to be determined.
So chapter 8, Inspector Raglan is confident. A very, very, very brief synopsis. Poirot and the police discuss the odd phone call placed to Dr. Shepard's home the night of the murder and other details of the evening. We learn of Inspector Raglan's methods and note-taking abilities.
So yeah, I've been calling them in my notes actually the investigation crew, because they're a little crew now. Poirot is very interested in the phone call. Melrose is like, why would he call at all? It's so weird. And Poirot's like, but there was a reason. And they're like, but why? And he's like, when we know that, we will know everything. Then we get a little bit of an, oh no, from Shepard. There was something almost indescribable in the way he said those last words. I felt that he was looking at the case from some peculiar angle of his own, and what he saw I could not tell.
There's something about it where it's very much like, none of this is adding up. This doesn't make sense. So here's something that will definitively point to the killer.
Exactly. Yeah. And also he's like, whatever obscure purpose this has, someone has done this for such a specific reason that there's no way we could know that without knowing who did it. But then we also, again, we get everything is equally and doubly just pointing to Ralph. Poirot's like, we assume that it's Ralph at the train station. The killer is probably really familiar with the lay of this land and just like how the building works and where the window is. And so again, fits with Ralph, also fits with Shepard. So yeah, so this chapter just like drops all sorts of little fun, juicy hints that we're not meant to really think about. Poirot's like, hey, Raymond, hey, Parker, because they're the ones really familiar with the house and really familiar with Ackroyd's schedule. He's like, have any strangers visited recently? Could they have been like scoping out, if it is an outsider, could they have been like figuring out the lay of the land? And Parker's like, well, they did have a visitor from the dictaphone company visit, but that's really it. And he hadn't really made a decision yet about whether he was going to buy one. Poirot is kind of like, Raymond has a window into Ackroyd's life that no one else does. Maybe he's been hearing something. If only these walls could speak. And, it's so good. He says, a tongue is not enough. They would also have to have ears and eyes, but to be sure that these dead things, he touched the top of the bookcase as he spoke, are always dumb. To me, they speak sometimes. Chairs, tables, they have their message. And then Shepard goes, what message? I cried. What have they said to you today? That specific I cried is so out of character. He's been so quiet. He's been so smooth. And you can just, there's this like urgency that comes out of nowhere.
Right. And also you can also read it, or at least I read it the first time. It was his frustration being this old guy has lost it. Mm-hmm. He's talking about furniture talking to him. Why did we put him on this case? I do want to just quickly go back because Poirot plays around with suspecting Raymond. He's so efficient. But after learning that he doesn't gamble, Poirot dismisses that line of thought. But this does tell us that Poirot is sniffing out blackmail because he was, as soon as he realizes that Raymond doesn't gamble, then he knows Raymond's not in debt.
Yeah.
So he's thinking about debt. He's thinking about, is someone blackmailing someone because they're in financial distress? And could that be a motive?
Yeah, and then we get like, Raglan's like, well, okay, let me show you. I've, written everything down, and I have this list of who was in what room and where the servants were and whatever. And Poirot's like, yeah, that's a really great complete list, but it doesn't really solve anything. And so then, he kind of lets Raglan continue with his idea, but Poirot is really focusing in on that call from the station. And in that moment, too, his eyes are shining green. We know when he gets his eyes that are shining green like a cat, we know that he's right. He's onto something. He sees something no one else does. And in that moment, he kind of questions the whole Raglan theory. And Poirot is like, oh, Shepard, it's so interesting that you've been kind of quietly following me this whole time. You must have indeed been sent from the good God to replace my friend Hastings, he said with a twinkle. And we know that twinkles are always a bit sinister from Poirot, but it's easy to forget. I observe that you do not quit my side. How say you, Dr. Shepard, shall we investigate that summer house? It interests me.
That's so fascinating. I think for myself, there is this kind of almost need to the first time that I'm reading the book to feel like Poirot made a mistake retiring. Poirot really, really misses Hastings. Poirot is a sad, lonely old man. And none of those things are true except the first one, the retirement.
Yeah.
But I remember reading those other two books, and it's very obvious that while Poirot has a like for Hastings, it's not from a sense of respect to a certain extent. He's pulling all the strings in that relationship. Yeah. The twinkle in his eye could almost be seen as a nostalgic sort of like, you're my friend.
Yeah.
And it could then also be the exact opposite, which is what you just said. It's interesting that you're following me around so much.
Gotta love Poirot. He knows. He just knows. And we don't. We do not.
There's the t-shirt. He knows and we don't.
We don't. So they go to the summer house, and this is a great little red herring setup. All of this has to do with Mrs. Russell and her son, but it could be anything. And so we get a scrap of stiff white cambric, and so it's oh my God, I need to find out what this is. And it's our word for chambray now, which is that denim-like but lighter fabric, comes from that. I think I was texting you when I was doing these notes, I was suddenly I'm buying all these chambray dresses.
My favorite thing is the messages that you send that if people were not to know that we did this podcast, they'd be like, what the hell is going on? Sometimes you send things with no context, and it's amazing. Like that. I'm shopping for this, checking out that. I'm like, oh, great. It's so funny.
Yeah. We can just, at some point, we can make our own scrapbook called Out of Context Text Messages from Poirot Pals. That will be our first coffee table book that we publish as Poirot Pals.
Please tell me that we're going to publish a coffee table book that has only photo recreations of text messages.
That's all it's going to be.
No nature, no cute pets, no nothing, just words.
Just words out of context. And that's what makes it fun. So get ready for that, people. We'll build a website.
2025.
Yes. So this fabric, though, was used for laces because it's kind of heavier, but it's super versatile, which I think is kind of smart because in terms of class, I have the feeling it could be a high-low fabric. It could be from any type of dress. If we were to pick a certain scrap of fabric that was particularly ambiguous, I think cambric is a good choice. Should we get our Substack going where we write substantial things, I could write an essay about the history of cambric. So get ready, world. Yeah. They also find a goose quill. Who knew that goose quills were used for taking drugs back in the day? We'll find that out later.
That was a new one. Yep. And I read Keith Richards' biography.
No goose quills?
No goose quills.
Okay, well, he still has a couple years left to try new things. So basically, it ends with clues, clues, clues. We're away from the house. We're on another trail. We're about to go through a mega red herring fest because in order to just keep the book going, it's backstory central now, where like all of these hidden relationships, love interests, family members come out of the woodwork so that everybody can be a liar for Poirot to then yell at.
So what needs to happen is that unless, like you said before, this is just going to be a long slog to arresting Ralph.
Yeah.
There needs to be red herrings now.
Yeah.
There needs to be misdirection. And I just not going to go back, not going to say the name of it anymore, but there's a couple of books that preceded this one where now you are thinking after reading those that maybe we don't know even a third of this story. And now we're going to get these backstories and maybe there's going to be a case from 20 years ago, but none of that happens.
No.
These red herrings are, like you said, I honestly think to just keep the book going.
We're just allowing Shepard more opportunities to slip up, I think.
And we're also creating the awesome thing that happens in a couple of chapters when all of a sudden Poirot is working on his own.
Yeah, he leaves.
And Shepard has to guess what he's doing.
Okay, I just want to like tease the next episode.
Oh, please.
I am just enjoying that most of the books we have so far, actually, yeah, like Styles, Halloween Party, there's always a bit of a moment in some nature where things are revealed. We often get some metaphors and similes about mythology and folklore. And I feel like at the heart of every Poirot story so far is a garden scene. And we get some overhearing through some hedges. We're at a Poirot moment in nature, and it's going to be fun.
Yeah, it's going to be great. We've already had one kind of second-handedly almost, because that's a word, right? But when Carolyn is talking about what she overheard.
Oh, right.
This is the only place you could go to talk and not be heard. But of course, Carolyn's overhearing it anyways. So yeah, so there is already that kind of thing, but the goldfish pond is fantastic, and I'm really looking forward to the next episode.
Oh my God. And actually, it's so interesting. Caroline, she betrays herself and her personality for gossip, right? Like she hates the woods. And so Shepard knows that she went into the woods to pursue gossip because that's the only reason she would do it. In chapter 9, the goldfish pond, Poirot will get himself a little dirty in pursuit of knowledge. And so we can look forward to that as well. He's betraying himself intentionally because information is I think it's what he loves more than being neat and clean.
Well said. Yeah.
I'll just, before we record next time, I'll just roll around in some dirt as well, just to be ready.
That's excellent. I usually do. But it's like 3 or 4 days beforehand and still haven't showered yet. Which is fine.
And that's how you show you care about clues.
Well, that's what I tell my partner. Listen, I really care about clues. Get out of this room, Chad. Hey, we're going to do something different at the end of this, aren't we?
We are. Thanks for reminding me, or else I would have not. Okay. Do you want to say it, or do you want to say the first part and I can say the second part, or how do we want to do it? Or we could do sentence by sentence?
Let's do it sentence by sentence.
Do you want to go first or second?
I'll go first. For more from Chad and Caitlin. Oh, I like Caitlin and Chad.
Okay.
For more from Caitlin and Chad, follow Poirot Pals on Instagram at Poirot Pals and on the Substack app.
Keep a lookout for our YouTube content and website coming soon.
Poirot Pals is a part of the Before Dark podcast network.
Check out our other Before Dark shows, such as Special Lady Day, wherever you get your podcasts. The end.
Nailed it. Okay, I'm so excited for the next episode.
Me too. I love a good goldfish.
Okay, I got nothing. All right, that's great.
Okay, bye.